Now, sound reinforcement refers to the devices and the processes used to amplify sound. So you'll see sound reinforcement systems, or sound systems for short, in venues like halls, theaters, arenas, stadiums, recital rooms. There's even a sound system in this room, but often they're found in halls and theaters, etc. And they're used for musical performances or speeches, sporting events, and other forms of public address. And they usually consist of microphones, mixing consoles, loudspeakers, and various computer-based devices. Sure, you knew all of that already anyways. Let's split our sound system into its three main components. So sound systems, on the whole, consist of input transducers, the signal processors, and output transducers. Now, we should be familiar with the nomenclature at this point. So input transducers refers to things like the microphones and pickups, electronic instruments, digital to analog converters, but here's the quintessential transducer. The first step is always converting your sound energy into electricity. That's input transducers. And then once you have your electricity, your musical electricity, also known as analog audio, then you set about signal processing. And this refers to all of the magic that happens within the confines of your mixing console. So let's go through all the pictures I made. Here's a nice artsy, shadowy picture of a signal processing unit. That's my small mixing board that I use for solo gigs. But this is where all the signal processing happens. So first of all, the first order of business in signal processing is preamplification, right? So where is that happening here in the mixing board, right? Draw your attention here. Yeah, these circles that allow input from instruments and microphones. That's preamplification. So that's part of signal processing. And then, of course, you set about perfecting your sound by EQing it and applying effects and mixing and balancing the volume. And, of course, that's the domain of what you're doing with the knobs on the mixing board. You can refer to all of these things as signal processing. Do some preamplification, use some equalization to perfect your sound, balance it for volume, maybe even apply some effects. So on the right-hand side of my mixer here, I got this little effects channel. It's just a reverb. So I apply some effects. All the normal stuff. Basically the things that you've been doing all semester long. And then there are two things that I haven't talked too much about, but they are crossovers and amplifiers. And basically these two manners of signal processing are preparing the signal for the output transducer, which of course is whenever the electricity turns back into sound, and generally speaking, that's carried on through loudspeakers. But you can also use monitors, which are just loudspeakers that are specialized and designed for the performers themselves. Or even a set of headphones that's an output transducer as well. Okay, that's the three-step process. Right, and I got this organization from the quintessential Yamaha release. The company Yamaha put out a great textbook, the Sound Reinforcement Handbook, and this is how they approach it. Okay, so let's inspect some of the details about each, though I'm fairly certain most of you are familiar with the input transducers. So converting sound energy into electric energy, that's what a transducer does. Microphones and loudspeakers are the most obvious, but of course there are others. Inside electric guitars and basses, there's a magnetic pickup that converts sound into electricity. That's a coil of copper and a magnet. And if you put that in proximity to vibrating strings of an instrument, then the vibrations are converted, transduced into voltage. And just one more quick reminder, voltage is the potential for electricity, and then the actual flow of electricity is the amperage. So you can think of this analogy. Voltage is the water built up behind the spigot, and then if you turn on the spigot, it flows through the garden hose. That's amperage. So you can think of that build up. You know, if you have your water on in the house and then you turn on your garden hose, but it's not going yet, you have voltage, but then as soon as you unleash the water and it's flowing through the hose, then you have amperage. Okay, that's what that business is. That's what transducers create. They create voltage, and then you connect your cables and you get amperage. Pretty simple. And of course, the result is analog audio. The term engineers use for amperages resulting from voltages transduced by magnetic pickups, microphones, and other transducers. So let's look at other transducers just for completeness. There's the tone wheel, which is a device that you'll find inside of a Hammond organ. The Hammond organ has many tone wheels corresponding to the keys. You can think of a little electric motor. Imagine the sound of a vacuum cleaner. When you run a vacuum cleaner, forgive me here, it essentially sounds like this. Right? It's just like singing a note. Right, so imagine if you had a little magnetic pickup right next to that little tone wheel. It's just converting that into electricity. That's what's happening in a Hammond organ. Every time you press one of the keys, it's just activating one of those tone wheels. It's sort of a specialized form of magnetic pickup. So instead of putting that in front of strings vibrating, you put it in front of a little motor that's spinning and humming. It's just singing a note. That's a tone wheel. Here's said device, right? These guys here. You might see them in churches, right? If the church isn't large enough or cathedral-like to have a pipe organ, they'll often have these Hammond organs. And I don't know if there's going to be any pictures of one taken apart. But if you take them apart, you'll notice that it's machinery. They're old school, right? This is old technology. Okay, I can't find any with partially taken apart. Take my word for it. There are many tone wheels in there. It's sort of like an also mentioned transducer. It's like, all right, microphones and pickups, yes, but have you heard of the tone wheel? It's like, oh, all right. Not too many tone wheels you're going to encounter in pro audio or sound reinforcement, except for the Hammond organ. And then here's an also mention. There's a specialized pickup that you'll find in electric acoustic guitars. Call it a piezo pickup. So these types of guitars that look precisely like acoustic guitars, yet have the capability to be plugged in. See, there's cable coming out. You're like, this is an acoustic guitar. What's up with that cable? Well, underneath this saddle, let's get a close-up of a saddle. Guitar saddle, also known as sapple. Okay. Sorry about the misspelling. Okay. So underneath this saddle is a piezo pickup. Now, it's essentially a crystalline substance, which yields to the electrical phenomenon of piezoelectricity, which works like this. You take one of those substances, those piezo substances, and you hold them under pressure, and they maintain a voltage. Right? They now have like an output voltage. Now, if you vary the pressure on the crystal, say by playing various strings on your guitar, that voltage varies, like a variable capacitance microphone almost. And that change in voltage can be converted into amperage in analog audio. They're pretty specific sounding. If you've been around this technology long enough, you can close your eyes and tell that, oh, that's a piezo pickup. Right? They kind of have like a real clear, precise type character of audio. And I would say about 10 years ago, the guitar manufacturers started to augment their piezo pickups with other sort of miking systems and transducing systems inside the acoustic guitars. Like what was Taylor Expression System. So in order to do away with the somewhat unusual piezo sound, some guitar manufacturers started using piezos and also like a system of like internal, basically contact condenser microphones to blend with the sound. And that's what my guitar has. In any case, these are very common, these piezo pickups. You'll find them in acoustic guitars, acoustic basses, acoustic mandolins that have been converted to electric via piezo pickups. Okay, now we'll go back in time. Although it's not super common, you'll still see tone wheels in modern pro audio. But these ones are basically museum pieces now. So these are like the last transducers we need to talk about. A phonograph pickup, right? So this would be record player technology. What's on the end of the arm riding the record's groove? That's a transducer, right? On a phonograph, it's the movement of the needle is just like a dynamic mic. It's being shoved back and forth through a magnetic field and creating something much like a magnetic pickup, analog audio. So imagine it like this. Inside the grooves of a record, if you can imagine a record, it's like a roller coaster ride that's shaped precisely like a sound wave. And that needle just rides it, and it wiggles, and those wiggles are converted to electricity. That's what a phonograph pickup is. And then there's a tape head, which can detect the chemical treatment or lack thereof on magnetic tape. So tape machines, right, it's like plastic, 1 or 2 inch thickness sheath of plastic. It's treated with a chemical substance, and by pressing record, that chemical substance is disfigured by the electricity coming in from the transducer. Right? It's like the transducer's little electricity is like firing away on the plastic that's been treated with the chemical, and then that chemical damage is permanent, and then the playback head can detect it and turn that back into audio. That's what's going on with tape heads. So like tape, let's see, machine head. These devices here. Yeah, it's a close-up of one. Looks like a cassette tape. It's just like metal. It's like it's rubbing right up against the tape. Yeah. Okay, now, you know, if you're a collector or you're into museum pieces, you can inspect phonograph pickups and tape heads, transducers closer, but it's pretty safe to just set them on the shelf now. They're like, all right, we're not going to be needing these unless, you know, we go back in time or whatever. This is outside of my area of expertise, but apparently there's an optical pickup summed with movie film. Right, so interprets the variations in density and transparency of film, and that's an optical pickup. Okay, so basically everything mentioned here has been subsumed in the realms of DAWs and is no longer really encountered. I guess we can think about interfaces such as the one I have in the front of the room here, which convert analog audio into digital signal. And I suppose you can think of that as a kind of transducer. Okay, most of that should have been review. It's basically microphones and electronic instruments and pickups. But we can also think about our digital to analog converters and vice versa as a kind of transducer. Okay, so let's talk about signal processing next. Signal processing is everything that you do once you have your sound converted into electricity. Now what do we do with it? Well, step one for most transduction is preamplification. We got to get the sound beefed up, right? So beefed up means increased in voltage. And of course, the problem is that the voltages produced by pickups and microphones is quite weak and easily polluted by interference from noise. So if we tried to do signal processing with the tiny little voltages instigated by our transducers, right? If we bypassed our preamplifiers, the sounds would quickly be overrun by interference from radio signals, cell phone signals, all the electromagnetic interference that is possible. Let's see if I have a better picture of a, here's a little board here. Right. Universally, before any signal processing occurs, preamplification must occur. Pretty obvious. You might hear pro audio experts abbreviate that word, just preamps. If they're talking about preamps, that's what they're talking about. The preamplifier might be the more specific and correct name. Guitar amplifiers, bass amplifiers, direct boxes, and other mechanisms are designed to turn weak signals into stronger ones. In addition to finding preamplifiers on your mixing boards, right? Here they are. Guitar amps have a preamp section. It remains true that the most commonly found preamplifiers are going to be at the top of your devices. Right. Here's a close-up of them. Mic 1, ball or unball. The hell does that mean? That's right, balance or unbalance. Balance is how many contact points, unbalance is how many contact points? 3, right? 1, 2, 3. Or unball, right? Except you could plug a guitar cable into that. Now, this happens often. There appears to be 4 microphone preamplifiers on this board. But oftentimes you'll find mixing boards that have additional channels. Yeah, look at this guy. 1, 2, 3 mic preamplifiers, and then there's this 7 and 8. These accept line. I literally have had the signal strength conversation 15 times with my ex-duo partner back in Pittsburgh. And still, he would do things like plug his guitar cable into that. And then ask me why. So there's no sound. I'm like, yeah, you need a preamp. You got to plug it into one of the ones that has a preamp. What gives away that there's preamps here is there's also a microphone input. So this channel here, there ain't no preamp on it. You could plug line into it, like an output of a CD player, or like these line ins here, like a line out of a keyboard or something. Like a line out. You look on the back of a Casio keyboard, and there's a line out. You can plug that into here. But you go try plugging an electric guitar or bass into one of these, you ain't going to get anything, because there's no preamp. It's a line in. It's maybe not the sexiest part of pro audio, but it's sort of necessary information. Do you know your signal strength? How strong is this? Does it need a preamp? Always ask and answer those questions for yourself in the realm of sound reinforcement. Okay, and then once we have our sound, our analog audio converted to nice strong line level, then we set about the normal aspects of signal processing, and of course equalization figures prominently there. Of course, an equalizer is an electronic tone control device that operates like a volume knob for specific frequencies or swaths of frequencies. Sometimes they're called spectrum processors, filters, or EQs. And most of your mixing boards will have some manner of equalization. So here's a channel strip here. Here's our preamp. Right? There's our volume knob. There's our effects sending it over here. Here's a knob that says monitor. We'll come back to that one. But here we go. Here is high, mid, and low. What kind of equalizer is that? It's fixed frequency. Fixed frequency. What kind of equalizer is this over here? That's a graphic equalizer. Right? It allows you to select specific frequencies. It's not a very large graphic equalizer, but it gives you a little bit more power than this. The difference is this is global. This is by the channel. That's less than ideal. This little board, it also has the dorky old fixed band. It's like having car stereo type control. Not a lot of control. Let's see if I got a close-up picture of a better board. The easiest way to tell if you have more power with your equalizer is if it has at least 4 knobs. All right, here's a real EQ. So each of the bands, it does have high, mid, and low, but it also has, looks like it has filter, but it allows you to select a frequency, which is a power that you don't have on, here's a fixed band, high, mid, and low. The mid-range is usually localized at 900 to 1,000, and it'll never not be at 900. So you need to make an adjustment at 400. You just don't get to do that with that type of equalizer. Okay, so what if you want to increase the sound of 250? What do you have to do with this equalizer mid-range section? First things first, you take that top knob and you scoot it over to 250. And then what if you want to turn 250 down? Then what do you do? What do you do with that other knob? You turn it towards the minus or to the plus sign? That to the minus. Listen carefully. The first knob is what frequency will be selected. The second knob is increase or decrease the volume of that frequency. That's a parametric equalizer. That's a real EQ. To be contrasted in your mind from the little clown show EQs that you get on many of these cheaper boards. You can't select frequencies. You'll never be able to do the top knob. You can go all the way, you can select 4,000, right? Move that knob almost all the way to 5 and back it up, and now you're affecting something around 4,000. Can't do that here. The high knob is probably just fixed at like whatever it's fixed at. Okay, equalization is probably the most preeminent manner of signal processing. And then we could think about mixing as a specialized form of signal processing, right? Remember the 5 different things that you can do, right? You balance the volume, the pan, the dynamics, and the reverberation and other effects. Right, so now you're in the realm of more perfectly realizing the sound that you have captured. Right, so you're adjusting the volume, you're adjusting the pan knob, you're applying EQ, maybe you're routing it over to some effects. Right, the normal stuff that you do in a DAW, you also do with a soundboard and a sound reinforcement system. Okay, this is probably the most difficult. These other aspects are sort of nuts and bolts, but there are many bad mixes. You guys maybe don't have as much experience going to shows as I do. I've been doing it for many years. But, you know, there's a lot of complaints that you're going to encounter. You know, things like, it was too loud is a real common one. Or, I couldn't even hear the singer. Or, this sounded nothing like their album. Right? This is usually evidence of a bad mix. It means that the person running the sound was not doing a proper job balancing volume, dynamics, reverberation, other effects, pan, etc. And, you know, I've been disappointed a million times. And my number one complaint is almost always, it was way too fucking loud and everything sounded like shit. And that's just, I often come away from shows just like leaving early. Like, okay, it was, why did it have to be that loud? Are you trying to offend me? Of course, I always have my earplugs on me, but you know, if you go to the wrong show, when I was a kid, I grew up playing like in metal bands, but then, you know, after I had my ear surgery, it just wasn't conducive to go to those shows anymore. Even if I had my earplugs in, and even if I had like jackhammer earplugs, you know, the earplugs that someone operating heavy machinery would wear, which won't be these ones. It will be the earplugs of this variety. Foam earplug. Yeah, these guys you buy at the pharmacy or for sleep, and they really attenuate volume. Even if I had those on, I think the last one I went to, my friend asked me, he was like, oh, my friend's band from Baltimore is coming to Howlers. Come see it with me. I was like, yeah, sure, I'll go see that. And I lasted like the first verse and chorus of the first song. And I was like, I gotta go. And I was in the back of the room. Okay, I don't know. So this was my considered opinion. Right. I think that's how I followed up. I was like, yeah, I had to go, man. Okay, so the signal processing, of course, occurs at the mixing console. It is the nexus of a sound reinforcement system. So most are adorned with equalizers and pan knobs and signal processing and routing variations. Here's a review of what the effects are in the realm of signal processing, right? Dynamics and reverberation and delay, most common ones. Dynamics controls the difference between loud and soft. Reverberation, processors that simulate performance spaces. And then there's ambient echoes, which also simulate ambience, born of delay. The difference, of course, is you can hear the individual echo repeats. They play it back later, play it back later, play it back later. But both delay and reverberation can be used to create the scale and scope of a performance venue. Okay, oftentimes the effects from your mixing board are applied via an effects loop, which is an electrical hookup that routes signals from a mixing board to a signal processor and back to the mixing board. Now, nowadays, most signal processing is done with inboard or onboard digital signal processors, DSP, that reside within the mixing board itself. So like this little guy here has got this little effects channel, right? That's DSP, digital signal processing. But not all mixing boards have it. And back in the day, most signal processing was done via effects loop. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. See if we can get a close-up of a... There we go. Sometimes they're labeled buses. Sometimes they're labeled auxes. But the concept is this. So you take the auxiliary send and you plug usually just an instrument or a patch cable, and you take it out of the send and you plug it into the inputs of your signal processor. And then you take the output from the signal processor and you plug it into your stereo aux returns. Left is mono, left and right would be two. So if you were using both of those outputs, say it's a stereo delay. That's called an effects loop. Effects loop. Let's see if there's a schematic. These were really common, especially if the engineer had a lot of outboard gear. Yeah, it's often done with guitarists too, because delay sounds better through the effects loop, while pedals sound better directly in. Let's see if I can stick with the pictures that I have. Let's see if I have any other close-ups of a mixing board. Okay, so imagine that you had, look at this big old rectangle right here. What is this device? That's right, that's a graphic equalizer. And say that you had a mixing board with insufficient equalization. You might want to hook up an effects loop so you can use a nice one like this. This is what we're talking about. There we go. There's an effects processor. Right. Output going to it, to the effects processor, and then back to the mixing board via the aux returns. Or sometimes you can also bring it back in on a channel. Usually it's better to come back in on a channel. So here's the effects send hole. So you send that to your EQ, say, and then you bring it back. And you might have an effects return, or you can just bring it back in on a channel. And that would be much like what we've been doing in the DAW, like having your own reverb or EQ channel. Basically, looks like this. You plug your cable out to your device, from your device back to your mixing board. And then once you have that effects loop set up, there will be a knob on your channel that controls how much signal is being sent out of that send. Here it's labeled effects. You may see them labeled bus, aux, or effect send. Okay, this is the point I was making. It usually makes more sense to route your return into its own channel because most of the channels have their own equalization. So that means that if you're getting something back from your reverb unit, say, that's polluted with too much mid-range, you'll have more control over that sound if it's coming back in on a channel, right? Coming back in on, like you're taking the reverb and you're plugging it into a channel, not just the effects return. The next step and the last step in signal processing is to crossover, or to route the signal through a crossover. Now this is a device that splits your signal into lows, mids, and highs. Crossover Pro Audio. Right, also just looks like an unassuming rectangle. All right, what the hell does a crossover do? Well, most PA systems are multi-driver, meaning that there are some small speakers, some medium-sized speakers, and some great big ones. So what a crossover does is it splits your analog audio into low, mid, and high, and then routes it to the appropriate signal. It routes it to the appropriate loudspeaker, that is. So say it's splitting it into low, mid, and high. It's taking the frequencies below 300, say, and routing that to the subwoofer. Like, what is a tweeter, tiny little speaker, going to do with 300 besides nothing? So a crossover just makes sure that it's routed to the appropriate speaker. And this is the main reason why Pro Audio sound reinforcement systems sound better than just the practice PA. Because the practice PA with just a power amp and your passive speakers, you're sending all signals to all parts of the loudspeaker configuration. Whereas a crossover splits it into bass, mid-range, and treble. Incidentally, speakers that are active, like these ones here, they have crossovers built into them because it's got a woofer, the big cone, and it's got a horn, that top cone. Inside of these cabinets are crossovers. Right, so it's taking the signal, sending the trebles to the tweeters, and sending the basses to the woofer. That's what a crossover is. And once it's been crossed over, then the sound is amplified and sent out to the output transducers, which is fancy speak for the loudspeakers. Now, of course, amplifiers create much higher voltage than preamplifiers. By the way, line level, which is what preamplifiers create, it's somewhere around 0.775, maybe up to a volt. Comparatively small to speaker level. Okay, so last bit here. The output transducers, which is fancy music technology speak for loudspeakers, or drivers, that's a cool name. Where you get the Pro Audio people talking, they might be talking about drivers. Well, they're just talking about speakers there. Okay, so most systems are multi-way, which means they consist of several speakers of various sizes working together in concert. And here are the most common types of loudspeaker. A woofer is a low-frequency speaker. Typically large, from 12 inches, 15, 18, 24 inches, and designed to handle frequencies below 320, the bass range. And if it can handle sounds below 30 or 40, they are technically called subwoofers. Though, in my experience, this designation is often obfuscated. You know, you go to buy a subwoofer. Here's a JBL 12, right? Well, that's technically just a woofer, especially if its frequency response is handling things, you know, in the bass range proper, not the very sub-bass range. Let's see. Yeah, look. This woofer technically is handling 32 to 150. Look what it's called. I don't know what to do with that information. other than sometimes there's some leeway here with the specifics. But technically, a subwoofer is handling this junk, right? The ultimate chest thumpers, right? The bottom of the bottom. So this is a woofer. But those speakers, they ain't got, you know, it doesn't have much below 100 in my experience. Okay, so mid-range loudspeaker, which is more appropriately what these speakers are, even though they're 15s. They're handling the 320 to 2560. Right, tweeter, right? That's that bell thing at the top of these, right? Sometimes they're called horns, and they're made to handle the trebles. Yeah. Tiny little guys. Yeah, and then I think if it has that infrastructure that has like a cone shape like these guys, then they're horns. But it's just like a tweeter inside a horn thing. That's the only difference. Probably just helps project the high range a little more evenly. Okay. And then there's a full range loudspeaker. Now you won't find this in Pro Audio, but this will be like what's in your laptop or like what's on these speakers here. It's like a single speaker that is multi-way in itself. It's like a little woofer and a tweeter built into one unit. Yeah, well, there's a good chance that Bluetooth speakers have multi-way stuff inside them. It's essentially a compound speaker cone. I'm failing showing you a picture of it, but you can imagine a speaker cone that has another little speaker cone built into it. That's a multi-way speaker. Here we go. That's its specialized name. A variety of speaker cones, more than one diaphragm attached to the voice coil. More than one diaphragm. Okay, super tweeter, ultra high end, extremely high frequencies. All right, and then to be separate in your mind is a monitor, which is basically a mid-range loudspeaker that's aimed at the performer instead of the audience. Usually situated on the floor of a performance stage or the desk of a project studio. It's designed to allow the sound technicians and the recordist and the producer or the musicians to hear the sound. So they're typically not as full range. So it's not necessary to have it be the best sound possible with the combinatorial effect of these speakers in concert in a proper multi-way system. So most monitor systems aren't multi-way. Probably just have a cabinet like this with, you know, maybe a woofer and a tweeter built in. Sometimes they're called tilt-back speakers because they got this cabinet that allows them to sit on the floor and be tilted back sideways like that. So that's a monitor. What's that mean? Passive. Yeah, it doesn't no amp in it, right? You buy this without an amp, are you going to get any sound? No, it's just going to have a giant paperweight. So you would need an amp. Yeah, notice how their shape is fundamentally different than like something that's meant to be the main, right? You could set this on the floor. It's got a little bit of sideways flange, but not nearly as configured. Like this is meant to sit on the floor and aim diagonally upwards at the player. That's a monitor. Okay, so that means that there is a fundamental difference between the mains and the monitors at the level of your mix. So as a sound engineer, as a technician, you will have to know which one's going where. There we go. See this level? That's the volume for the mains. See this blue one says monitor? That's the volume for the monitor. Look over here in the master section. That says monitor. That's the EQ for the monitor. That says main. That's the EQ for the mains. Right? That means whenever you're mixing, you have to handle more than one mix. That's the wrinkle. part of the reason why sound engineering is difficult. So no longer are you just configuring a mix. Now you're responsible for several. And if you're in a big band filled with divas, everyone's going to want their own mix. All right, so if you have, what do we got here? It's got 2 auxes. So you can either use those auxes as effects loops, which is increasingly rare because many devices now have DSP built in. But you can configure 2 monitor mixes. And if you had such a board, it'd probably be like the drummer's mix and then the front of the rest of the band members' mix. Like the people like standing at the front of the stage, they could probably handle one mix and the drummer might need a separate. In addition to your main mix, which is on a real board will actually give you long throw faders. So these are the volume controls for what's coming out of your main mix. Those are the mains. Those are the monitors. Okay, so large-scale sound reinforcement systems often feature loudspeakers arranged so as to work together, like a configuration. There's several speakers instead of one. For example, the PA system I have set up in this room, it's just a single speaker on a stand. An array is whenever you have several speakers working in conjunction with together to make a full range sound, and it's called an array. So they're usually configured as line arrays. Line arrays are usually hung from the venue's ceiling or some other support structure and features modular full-range speakers configured in one of several arrangements. And the most common arrangements are straight array, meaning the drivers or the speakers are hung in a straight column. There's an arcuate, meaning the drivers or the speakers are hung in a curve, curve, or a combination, a J shape, meaning that there's some drivers hung straight and there are some that are hung in an arc. It's a compromise. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about something that looks like this. Has anyone ever seen these before? You've been to a show, right? They're hanging from the ceiling. Say you go to see a large concert from a famous act. Yeah. They'll usually have line arrays. Okay, so you notice how that differs from my little practice PA, right? Several drivers. Each one of these speakers is called a driver. So given those 3 descriptions, is this straight, arcuate, or J-shaped? So an arcuate has an even 5-degree splay between each speaker. Let's take a look at some other ones. Check out these arrays. This is at Timberwolf Amphitheater nearby. Like see this? That's right. That's a J array. Look, they're straight, arcuate.
It's meant so the wave will go in all directions.
It's a compromise, yeah, because as we'll discover, there's some deficiencies in just a straight, and there's some deficiencies in just a curve or arcuate. A J array compromises between the two of them. I was trying to find some other ones. It was hard to get an amphitheater showing off their arrays on Google Maps, but this is the best one I found. Those are absolutely titanic arrays. Look how big that is. There's 2 of them. Okay. So each of these configurations have strengths and weaknesses for both frequency coverage and projection distance. Whether or not the speakers are making sounds all over the sound frequency spectrum. Does it got the low range? Does it got the mid range? Does it have high range? Right, that's what we're talking about. And then this is pretty obvious. What are we talking about? Projection distance. Yeah, so like if you're at this venue, it might be something like, okay, this is the one that I grew up next to. This is the one outside of Pittsburgh. I couldn't find the one that's similar to this in this region, but there must be. So you've probably been to a venue like this. It has like 5,000 seats and then room for like 20,000 in the lawn. Anyone ever been to a venue like that? Usually outside the city. You can't. It's in the shadows. But what do you think these dark column things are? Yeah, they're speaker arrays. So you imagine that Star Lake Amphitheater has to have a speaker array that's going to project. I mean, that looks like 100 yards at least, right? Say that you're in the back of the lawn it might be 100, 150 yards to the stage. All right, so these are the strengths and weakness rubrics one must consider. Okay, so for straight arrays, ones that are hung in a straight line, it turns out that it's not very good at high frequencies, because as the listener gets further away from such an array, the high frequency sounds begin to diminish significantly. And on the other hand, a set of speakers arrayed with a 5-degree splay, this would be the arcuate, would be an array that looks like this. It maintains near uniform frequency coverage, meaning that it's got good bass, mids, and trebles for as far as it's projected, but it doesn't project as far. So it seems like you might have trouble with a curved arcuate array in such a large venue as Star Lake. Oh, there they are. What kind of array is that? Yeah, it looks like a J-shaped array. It seems to be like these large venues need to use the compromise configuration. What's it compromising? It's compromising projection distance and frequency coverage. So the J-shaped array, which has a partially straight and partly curved, thereby providing decent frequency coverage and decent distance projection. So one of the drawbacks is that the straight speakers and the curved speakers require different levels of signal processing to maintain a consistent time alignment. Now, you might recall the somewhat slow speed of sound. So if you're trying to have sound reinforcement that covers great distances and you don't have delay-based signal processing applied to the different speaker aims. So what is being said here is there needs to be a delay on the curved part of the array so as to not result in phase cancellation, because you'll have your sound projecting at different angles and therefore not coordinating at a distance. So what ends up happening, I think the bass frequencies, the speakers either need to be further behind or there needs to be delay applied. Delay applied whereas the primary signal is not heard, but only the delayed signal. So we're used to applying delay in a way where you hear the primary and then you hear the echoes. The primary and then the echoes, the echoes, the echoes, the echoes. So what if we just had one echo and we silence the primary? Okay, so this means matching the speed at which the sound reaches the listener when the sound is coming from a multi-driver system, also known as an array. Besides the time discontinuities introduced by J-shaped arrays, similar deformities are created by the interaction between low and high frequency speakers. This is sometimes referred to as intermodulation distortion.
Oh yeah, you have two waves and they influence each other.
Yep, they influence each other. So imagine that you have a low, powerful frequency coming from the subwoofers. That frequency is messing up what's coming out of the tops. It's messing up what's coming out of the arrays. So I don't know if we have any pictures here that show both. I think these right here are the subs. You see these big boxes? And then here's the line array. So notice that it looks like the subs are behind distance-wise. Okay, so since the woofers have slower sound response than the tweeters, delay is often used to ensure simultaneity. And you could also do what's going on, I think, in this picture here. Place the tweeters further away from the subs. Okay, so the process of configuring speaker arrays for time discontinuities and for frequency response is referred to as tuning the system. And like Ria said, this is probably what's going on immediately before the show that sometimes can result in delays. Some other factors affect the tuning are destructive interference, constructive interference, phase curves, and transfer functions. So destructive interference would be whenever the phase curves are out of sync with one another. One is compressing while the other one is rarefacting. That could result in a decrease of volume. So you might have to work this out of the system. Or you could have constructive interference, maybe resulting in too much mid-range. So you got a bunch of mid-range speakers working together in concert, and they're reinforcing the volume unproductively. And of course, this is a matter of phase curves. And then also transfer functions. So transfer functions would refer to the different frequencies being sent to the tops than to the subs. Who remembers what that device is called from Monday? What splits the signal? That's right, a crossover. So the moment where the frequency is handed off to another speaker system, that's a crossover, and referred to as a transfer function. Transferring the signal. It's basically like 3 overlapping parabolas. This is 20. Up here's 20,000. Right. So some speakers are covering this. Some speakers are covering that. Some speakers are covering this. Right? So this would be like the subs, the mid-range, full-range speakers, and then the tweeters. So like where they cross over, and there could be some transfer interference between. Okay. Okay, so the conclusion here is that understanding sound reinforcement is a prerequisite for being a music technologist or a music producer or audio engineer. Really, it's where the most immediate money is, right? If you want to go into this field, like, can you run sound? No, I cannot. Well, then you don't get most of the jobs, right? Sound reinforcement. Right? It seems that the record industry has been systematically slaughtered over this past 15 years, starting with Napster. And it used to be that bands would go on tour to sell albums, and the concert tickets were very cheap. So I remember going to shows, like big shows at Star Lake, for like $20, $25. I mean, it was lawn seats, but like going to see like Metallica for like $25. Like, how much are concerts these days? What if somebody comes that you want to go see? What's it cost? What? Yeah, 80. Okay, that's because the musicians can only make money by touring endlessly, which means that there's basically endless opportunity for sound reinforcement work. That's where the money is. Not sitting behind the DAW making a beat that you think someone's going to pay attention to. They're probably not gonna. Here's a real quick primer on what to do with something that's a little bit more down to earth, like this PA system here. Step 1 is that the speakers should be spaced evenly and parallel. ABL Eons from 2006. Okay, if the sound person is also the performer, then place the mixing board at the performance station. It's not always obvious where the power is. People book you for like outdoor gigs, and then you get there and you're like, where's the power? They're like, yeah, I don't know. So I've used like a 100-foot extension cord to run out to the middle of the street. Okay, put the microphones in a useful position, which includes, downstage for vocalists and upstage for the guitar amps. That's musical theater speak. And there's a line array. Here's the world's saddest PA system. Super awesome. That's a totally straight array. No arcuate there. What am I looking for? Oh, upstage and downstage. This convention of demarcating the specific parts of the stage. Yeah, this is what it, if you get yourself a job at like a sound rental company, most of my contacts are still, right? Pittsburgh Sound Rental. They rent PA systems. It's basically like 2 people in a truck. And what do? You do this, right? You haul stuff and you set it up, and then you run sound. And then at 3 in the morning, when everything's gone, you haul it out of there. And you get paid. But you got to know what I'm trying to teach you to get that job. If they're like, can you run a mixing board? And you're like, no. And then they're like, and I'm not hiring you. Right. Okay. Then run all the cables. Be sure to use balance cables for mics, unbalanced for instruments, speaker cables for speakers. Okay, so turn on the mixing board, then turn the power amps on. Okay, so the power amps are inside the speakers. Here's the mixing board. What's that entail? What do you do first? Someone's standing at the mic going, check, check, check. Which knob is the spigot? You just start doing this, you're like, oh, I'm just moving this. Gain, right? That's how much water's in the system, right? Pan is left and right. That would be, move that knob to the left, sounds over here. Move that knob to the right, sounds over there. All right, so you move the gain knob up, they're going check, 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 1, 2, 1, 2, check, 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 1, 2, then you start slowly moving the fader. You leave the master at a normal, like where the, you know, this one's a little bit down, just like Studio One. Just leave it at the tick mark or somewhere thereabouts. That's called a line check. So do it by turning down all the volume levels. Like, all right, just crush, crush, down, down, down. Right? You don't want obnoxious feedback blasts. And then get a nice strong signal from each source. And then adjust them for volume, pan, dynamics, effects, and equalization, just like you do when you're mixing. The difference is you're not mixing for finality. You're mixing for the purposes of broadcast, public address. Then after getting the individual sounds, just have the band or the artist play a song. Like, all right, why don't you guys go ahead and play a song and just like dial in your mix further and say, all right, thank you. Right, you're all ready to go. And then essentially everyone waits around until 7:30 or whatever when the show starts. And this should all occur at like 6:30, you know, and that's maybe even cutting it. Now, if the performance area, the stage, is far away from the mixing station, you have to use a specialized piece of equipment known as a snake, which is essentially a patch panel on the end of a very long combined cable that has many cables inside of it. They're not a fun purchase. Take sweet water. See what I'm talking about? Yeah. It's just a patch panel, and then on the other end is like all the inputs. And, you know, here we go. $300 for a used snake, and it's probably not even that long. 25 feet. So what happens if your stage is 100 feet away from the mixing station? You got to spend an unhappy amount on the snake.